Good morning, friends. I am Patty Elhoff, the author of Upcycle with Decoupage. And before I show you today's before and after project, I'd like to express a very sincere thank you from the bottom of our hearts for all of your condolences towards our loss this past week. And with that said, I would like to proceed on with this week's project like she would have wanted us to. And thank you again. Here's what we'll be working on for this week. I took this vintage window that I had gotten from my brother's house, thank you, Sean, and I turned it into this, and I will show you how I did this step by step. Now, sometimes you can find these windows at yard sales, salvage yards, thrift stores, or like I did, sometimes someone will buy an older home and it needs updating, and you don't have to know this person. I've purchased things off the side of the road or just asked the homeowners if I could have them and they let me have them. Now, these panes are already weathered, so I didn't have to do any crackle finishes on there. That's all natural, which was a big plus for me. So here's how I started on the rest of the window. Now, if you're comfortable with a transfer, you can also do a transfer here instead of the stencil. But the first thing you want to do is center your stencil or your transfer. And I used a dry erase marker once I had this all in place. And you want to remember, this is going to go on the back of your window. By the way, I used a level because you want to make sure that's perfectly straight before you do any work. Now, I made my marks on the front of the window, but the stencil is going on the back, and that's where I taped it using those guidelines. So when you turn the mirror around, this is what you'll see from the front, but the stencil you can see is taped onto the back. That's where we're going to do our stenciling. This is low-tack painter's tape I have on here, and I used a thick pouncing sponge brush for this. This is regular acrylic paint that I used on this stencil, by the way, and I just put a little piece of white paper in back of it to show you how it came out. And you can take 91% alcohol and rub away those lines. Just use a cotton pad. And as far as the back goes, if you like I did, I went outside the stencil a little bit. This 91% alcohol also works to remove some of those lines and to get rid of any tape residue. Sorry about the lighting in that shot. Now, I noticed that my window was starting to chip a little bit as I was working, and you don't want that to get into your work. So what I did, and this is a safe thing to do anyway, is I put a top coat all around the windowsill to seal it, so none of this would start chipping off and falling into my work. While that was drying, I took my napkins, and I had not yet separated them, and I started to cut out images of all of the flowers and pieces that I wanted. And this is probably the most important aspect of this project. You want to make sure you practice your design first. Where you want your images to go is really important. You want to know that before you start to decoupage. So keep in mind you're going to reverse these napkins because they're going to be facing forward. You'll be looking at the back of them when you decoupage them. And make sure that your stencil is facing outward also. If you'll notice, my stencil looks backwards to us because it is facing the other way. This is the way we want it, so we can work here. Now, this is just a suggestion because a lot of times people write to me and say they want to start this huge project, but they're worried. You can start out on a small clear glass plate and attempt all of this and practice on it first so that it's not so overwhelming. Before I started my decoupage, I took some of the acrylic paint that I used to stencil with on a flexible toothbrush and I splattered it all over the glass. And I used my hair dryer to dry between each step of this process. And once that was dry, I took my decoupage glue, I'm just using Mod Podge here, and I placed it in the section where I was going to place my image, and I just worked in sections at a time. So right here, I added my decoupage glue. I then put my image down, and remember, see what I did here? I put it face up, and then I realized, oh no, I had to take this off and turn it around because we're doing a reverse decoupage. So once I removed that and cleaned the surface, I separated my napkins, I put my decoupage glue down, and I placed the napkins down so that they are facing the opposite way. The image was not facing me, but outward. I took a piece of saran wrap and I pressed everything down and bunched the saran wrap up and made sure there were no wrinkles in here. I then just continued to decoupage the rest of my project in the design that I had set out to do before I did my decoupage. And I then put this aside to dry. I did dry it a little bit with a hair dryer, but for the most part, I let this part dry on its own while I did some other things. And here's how this looked when it dried. By the way, you do not have to cut those images out exactly around the outsides. You can leave a little bit of the napkin there because we're going to put a similar colored paint behind it so you won't see the excess napkin. Now, even though this is dry, you want to take your blow dryer and run it across the back. Do you see how there are a few pieces here where some of the napkin did not lay flat? So I'm just going to go all around the piece and make sure everything is down. I'm going to dry it, and now I'm going to add decoupage glue over the whole surface here. I used the blow dryer again just to help speed up the process here. Now, once I was sure everything was dry, I took 4 different shades of chalk paint, and then I took some Elmer's glue or white craft glue, and I am working in sections, and I put the craft glue down, and then I pounced on a blend of 4 different colors, and I used white mainly around the images because that's the same background color as our images, but I also used some pink and a very light pastel yellow and a different colored pink in there just to give this some depth. And I put the blow dryer over it, and you can see how the cracks are starting to show up here. Here are a few things to note. When you're using the craft glue, and I'm just working in small sections, the thicker the glue, the larger the cracks. I don't like large cracks myself, so I put on a thin coat of the white glue, and I'm using chalk paint because what happens is the craft glue takes longer to dry than the chalk paint, which dries almost immediately, and that causes those cracks. That's why I'm using chalk paint, and that's why I am using a craft glue. So I'm painting a thin layer of the craft glue on with an acrylic brush, and then I'm using the thick sponge brush to pounce over that craft glue with my chalk paint. Don't go over the glue too much or you can pull up your work. I continued this all over the window, and I made sure to blow dry each section as I finished it. Now when I turned my piece over, I loved the way this looked, but the cracks weren't showing up. Up close you could see them here along with the splatter and the different paint colors. So what I did was I went over the back, and around the images I put some more white paint, And then in sporadic areas, I added some brown paint, which was the same color acrylic paint that I used over for the stencil and for the splatter. And I then dried everything, and then I covered the whole back of this with just one coat of paint, and I let it dry overnight. Now, I also worked on a plate while I was doing this, just so that you could see how this napkin looked when I just used the dark brown color, and it's a little bit too dark for me. So I'm glad I added the white to the back of the napkins on the window. But this is why you might want to attempt this on a smaller item first. I didn't use a stencil or a transfer, but really you just want to get a feel for the project. One other thing, I'm sorry it's so dark here, I did use a top coat. Once everything dried, I put a top coat over the whole back of this in order to seal all of the work that we've just done. And here is how our completed project looks the following day. You can see that the cracks have really shown through today. I'm so happy with this project. I hope you are too. If you've got any questions, please feel free to ask me. I am standing out here in the rain, so this picture doesn't look as good as it could. I'll take this inside and show you a couple of other clips of it. In the meantime, thank you for subscribing. Thank you for your lovely comments and compliments. For supplies, you can head on over to my website. I'll include a clip below for those supplies, including the stencil. You'll have to find the window on your own. I'm sorry. And in the meantime, Upcycle with Decoupage is also on Facebook. If you go on over and click like and follow the page, you'll be notified every week when I put a new video out. Once again, I am so grateful and so touched by all of your condolences. Thank you so much, guys. I will see you next week with another video. Bye-bye.